What is up, guys, and welcome to another episode of Guarani Vision, the first ever podcast dedicated to Paraguayan football in English. As always, I'm Roberto Rojas, and joining me my two great co-hosts, Federico Perez and Ralph Hanna. And guys, it's a new month. We're officially in October, only a couple months until the end of the year, until we go into 2025. And a lot has happened in the last week in Paraguayan soccer. Obviously, there are a lot that is going to be coming up next week when we do our World Cup qualifier preview. Big games for Paraguay against Ecuador and Venezuela, really kind of to see if they can continue that World Cup dream of qualifying for 2026. Obviously, we have to talk about what's been going on with the Paraguayans abroad that are on this squad, who have been able to win titles, who could still win a title, most particularly in MLS. There had been also some rumors of possibly a Paraguayan possibly leaving. We'll talk about who in particular has been linked to some big clubs in Europe, and also talk about what's been going on in the Clausura, because there are going to be games happening in the international break that we won't mention next week when we do our preview show, but they still have to be of mention of importance. And it's going to be interesting to see if there are going to be some players that will be missing from these squads that do get called up. But a lot has been going on. I think the big one coming up, Fede, that I did wanted to mention is the FIFA Congress. The FIFA Congress will be happening in Asuncion next year. It's the first time that it's ever happened. I think it's a big win for Comebol, for Alejandro Dominguez, really, to get this sort of thing happening. But yeah, I think that's the big one that's happened over this week. Like all the talk about what's been going on with soccer and everything about that. But the big one is that the FIFA Congress on October 3rd, which was announced, of course, yesterday, will host the 75th FIFA Congress that will be happening on May 15th of 2025, ironically during the week of Independence Day in the country.
Yeah, hey guys, it's great to be back. Hi to everyone listening to Guarani Vision, and it's just amazing, right? I mean, talk about a huge Congress like the FIFA Congress that moves around 2,000 people. I don't know how they're going to handle it here in Paraguay. We don't have that many hotels. We're not used to that kind of people moving around in our country. So I really don't know how they're going to handle it. I want to see it happening because I think it's going to be probably the first big test as we move into that 2030 World Cup, right? Much hasn't been done since the announcement that we have the World Cup being played here. And so far, it's just going to look like we're going to have only one game in our country. But I was even hearing rumors, guys, that they want to take advantage, people from the government, and maybe have a couple of meetings with people in that Congress and say, hey, can we get another game? Can we get 2, 3 games? That, everything is possible after what we've seen lately here in Paraguay. We have so many competitions going on, big events that we haven't had along the history. So you give props to the government also, guys. I mean, props to the president. I mean, Santiago Peña, he's putting in a lot of his time, effort into sports, and we're seeing that from the budget. We're seeing that from the attention that the athletes are getting. So I think this is something that we can get into deeply in another episode, but definitely Paraguay is going to be on the lookout in May 2025 when FIFA brings their Congress here to the country. I'm really excited as press. I'm really excited to go and be part of a huge event like this. I really have no idea what a Congress of FIFA is about, but I want to be there, guys, because this is going to be once in a lifetime here in Paraguay for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, Ralph, it's only been done 75 times, or it's going to be 75 by the time that Asuncion gets the chance to host it. So clearly, this isn't something that happens all the time, and it's really extraordinary that the country's able to pull it. But of course, there are the issues that Paraguay will always go through. Is like you had mentioned in a tweet recently, they don't have a big hotel to really staff to really lodge all these people into one area. So I'm curious to see how the government, how CONMEBOL, how FIFA are going to try to get this kind of going. But overall, it's still big to see, this vast majority of, people that work in the sport of football get centralized in Asuncion for the big decisions that come about from FIFA.
Yeah, that's right. Hi guys. Hi everybody. In Luque, not Asunción, right? Because I'm guessing they're going to meet in the CONMEBOL headquarters. So you do have one very big hotel which CONMEBOL made, but I don't think that would fit 2,000 people. So now one of the things that I heard is maybe they're looking for a new kind of land that they can use around there. So they have a second hotel. But the reality is, I don't know if you can build one in 8 months or however long we have left. So the plan might be to take a lot of people into the center, and then they're going to have to the center of Asunción, and they're going to have to be traveling across the city, which can be very difficult with with traffic and with infrastructure. So we'll see how it works, how they figure that out. But I think overall it's very positive, right? That Paraguay gets a chance to be a showcase here. I'm guessing a lot of those FIFA members, especially the Europeans, have never been to Paraguay. They would have little reason to. Paraguay don't really host friendlies against European teams, so I think that's pretty cool, right? That we're going to see a lot of these members coming over for the first time, and this is ahead of a possible game in 2030 because we don't know which team will end up playing against Paraguay in that matchup. So it could be a UEFA team, it could be from Asia. We have no idea. But now they get to kind of see things and be on the ground for themselves. So it's going to be exciting.
It's clearly a Alfaro effect, guys. Like ever since he's come in, it's just been kind of positive news for Paraguay overall. I mean, we're even talking on the day that the Copa Libertadores Femenina is starting in Paraguay as well. Of course, that was made. This decision was made before, but hey, it's happening right now at the time. So clearly there's that effect. But yeah, it's a big event, and we'll definitely have to talk about it when the date comes closer. But it's a big news for Paraguayan football and I guess for the country as a whole. To switch gears now to what's going on in Paraguay for the national team, because obviously the squad was announced. The squad of the players abroad was announced by Gustavo Alfaro, and I'm just going to read off some of the names here that we have. It's a list of, some familiar names that we got, of course. In goalkeeper, we have Gatito Fernandez, Carlos Coronel, and Juan Espino, the same three goalkeepers from the last time. In defense, you have a little bit of a change here. It's the same players: Gustavo Gomez, Junior Alonso, Fabián Balbuena, Santiago Arzamendia, Omar Lerete, Gustavo Velasquez, and Juan Cáceres. But there's two new names. I do want to start on that real quick. I want to go to Fede on this one. We get the return of another News player, Saúl Salcedo, who has always been on the Paraguay squad sporadically. Not always, but he's always there, playing for Paraguay every so often. I think there was a joke me and Rob made. He kind of appears every 2 years or something like that, but he's there. And the new one, I think the one that had been making the works for a couple of days because he'd been speaking on Paraguayan radio of getting his naturalization. Agustin Sandes. Agustin Sandes, who plays at Rosario Central, used to play at Boca Juniors, thanks to his parents. I believe his father, if I'm not mistaken. He is able to play for Paraguay, Argentine born and raised, but of course Paraguayan now for the national team. So you have a lot of players now playing in Argentina. If I'm not mistaken, that's 5 Argentine players, so Argentine league-based players playing in the defense for this Paraguay national team. But yeah, the big new one is Saúl Salcedo and Agustin Sandes returning to the squad.
Yeah, Agustin Sandes is really a new name, and especially in a position where I think Alfaro is looking into several different options, right? I mean, that's a key place, I believe, for Alfaro, the wingers, right? The players that can defend well on the sides. He did it with Juan Cáceres against Vinicius against Brazil in this last match, and I think he's thinking clearly ahead of what's coming up. We have two very hard games ahead of us between Ecuador and Venezuela. But I think looking at this list, I think he's looking at the long run. I think he's looking at all the players, all the options, and he wants to have them in the practice a couple of times. He wants to have them alongside, and he wants to see them up close. That's why I think he's calling up Saúl Salcedo to have another option, a younger option also. So he's kind of mixing it up, guys. He has the experienced defenders with a couple of young promises. Saúl Salcedo has had several injuries along his career that had kind of stopped him along the way. I'm hoping that he can establish and really play regularly, just like other names on this list also have done, like Ángel Romero, who is also coming back. But in that defense, Sandes, I don't know what kind of player we're going to see in the national team, Ralph. I don't know what you're expecting from him. I saw that he scored the other day a header right after he was called up, so he looks like he's motivated coming into this team.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that was the biggest surprise for me. I guess Salcedo's a surprise too, considering that I think, he last played 2022 in a game Roberto and I were at, which I forgot. I'd seen him play, so I guess it wasn't a memorable performance because Roberto had to remind me there. But I think he's very much going to be sitting behind the main starters, right? The Balbuena, the Gustavo Gomez, Alderete. The interesting thing about Sandes is, was because we saw Junior Alonso play on the left-hand side, is Alfaro now thinking, "Oh, okay, I really need someone similar to Cáceres, like Fede is saying, on both sides, so we can be just a little bit more positive going forward in these two games where we feel we can win, especially Venezuela at home is a game that Paraguay have always felt they should win, and apart from that catastrophe in the 2018 qualifiers, they pretty much do win. So I think maybe he's looking at that as well. How can I switch up the teams a bit to have those options where I can become a bit more positive, a bit more attacking? And the way he's doing that is from fullback, right? He's not really going to make too many changes elsewhere. It's really that kind of balance with the midfield defense. So it's interesting call-ups. And I get the feeling Sanders will see something from him maybe in the Venezuela game. I still feel against Ecuador, we'll get more of a team that we saw against Uruguay, that slightly more defensive setup with essentially four central defenders. But let's see where he's going. It's exciting to see these new call-ups.
It is very exciting. One thing that we didn't see that is exciting, you would say, in the midfield is that there's not a lot of change. As we look at the midfield, we have Miguel Mirón, Matias Villasanti, Caco Romero, Andres Cuas, Ramon Sosa, Diego Gomez, Damián Bobadilla, Hugo Cuenca, and one new name that is also back, Ralph, and wanted to go on this one, Matias Galarza. So he's obviously Alfaro's really keeping the base of players that he has trusted in the last games. And yeah, maybe one or two changes here and there. That's already three changes of a squad of 26. Yeah, it shows that there is that sort of base, and it's not the chopping and changing that we're always seeing that we've seen in the past as well. So that's a good sign, I would say, for Alfaro to make just one change in the midfield. And Galarza's a good option, I would say. Obviously he's had the experience of working with players like Ramon Sosa and Blas Rivero, so there is that sort of understanding. Of course, Blas is not in the squad, but obviously he's had the experience of working with someone like Ramon at Talleres.
Yeah, that's right. And Galarza is one of those players that he's very good at kind of carrying the ball. So running with the ball, not just a passer, but plays more centrally than say someone like Sosa. So I think it gives us another option when we're thinking about, for example, is Diego Gomez going to be playing all 180 minutes, or because of the way Gomez has to play, track back and that kind of thing, will there be times where he needs to have a rest, and who's the best player to fill in there? Also, I just wanted to mention the reason he's not having to change much is because the results were so good, right? The results were good. There's no suspensions. There's been no big injuries since last time, which is, everything's kind of falling into place for Alfaro as well, because he hasn't had to worry about those kind of injuries. Remember, like Enciso missed most of last year, right? So you had that Diego Gomez was injured right up until the Olympics. So there's been these injury problems, which now he doesn't seem to have. That means he can keep this team consistent. And again, I think we're going to see a really similar setup to what we got against Brazil. Never change a winning team, right?
Yeah, I'm totally with you on that situation, Ralph. I don't expect Matias Galarza to get that many minutes either in that midfield. He is, I think, a good sub maybe for Damián Bobadilla, looking at the way that he plays, right? He's a good alternative maybe there. Also, Diego Gomez, I believe, can't play this first game against Ecuador. I'm happy that he's obviously back in shape, even though I saw him coming off the field for Matias Rojas in this last game of Inter Miami as they clinched their regular season title. I'm really happy for him. Another title for a very young Paraguayan player, and he's going to come with that attitude again in that locker room, that winning attitude that he's shown. He's one of the players that I'm really enjoying out of this camada, like they call it here, out of these young new players that are coming through in the national team. And obviously, there are a couple of names in that midfield that I think we're more going to move mostly around. I don't see players breaking through or taking advantage of other situations. As long as we have Andres Cubas ready for action, I do think he's another player that's going to be in that midfield. So there's a spot open against Ecuador, but I think against Venezuela that we're going to see probably the same midfield. And in offense, it's totally open because that's where the big new name is, Roberto. And I think Alfaro, just like I mentioned before, he's not only thinking about this game, he might even be thinking about Bolivia, who is also in our calendar very close.
One step ahead of everyone, really. Yeah, and the big name, and just looking at the forwards real quick, we have Angel Romero, Tony Sanabria, Julio Enciso, Alex Arce, Isidro Pita, and the new name, the biggest surprise of them all, Alfie Oviedo of Bolivar. I mean, Fede, this was a shock. I mean, yes, it is understandable that we are thinking ahead to the game against Bolivia, but I think Alfaro is really thinking ahead of having two players, Alex Arce, who plays obviously at Liga de Quito in Ecuador, and Alfie Oviedo, who's been on good form in Bolivar. But of course, the big factor is he's playing in altitude as well. So that's another big thing that Alfaro is trying to get at.
Alfaro knows Ecuador players. He knows them very well. He has them very well studied, and he's going against Becasese. I was actually surprised. I don't know if you guys heard his press conference yesterday. I think it was when he announced some of the players. He mentioned that there's actually a very close link between Alfaro and him. They know each other very well. I think there's even family links there. I think I heard that his wife was a teacher of one of his sons or something like that, and so they know each other very well. So this is going to be a tactical match, and I think Alfaro might even try to throw a different card out there to try to surprise the other coach. But and it is kind of weird. It's going to be different players are going to go straight to Quito. They're not going to come by the country. So they're planning it differently this time around also. And as for Alfio Oviedo, he might get a chance, guys. I mean, if players aren't feeling well right before the game, and he's feeling himself like he has been in La Paz lately, scoring with his new team, I think he took no time really to adjust to his new club. So I'm really happy for him. An opportunity for a player that did really well, I believe, in big teams like Libertad. In Cerro Porteño, he didn't get enough chances, but when he got the chances, he really showed the best out of him. So I really expect the best out of this team in both games.
Yeah, Alvio Oviedo he's only 28. You feel like he's been around for so long, but he's only 28, and so he's still kind of almost in his prime as a player, right? The interesting thing is he came through with Rubio New and Chiquiase, so he got his first cap with Chiquiase a long time ago, I think in a friendly game. And then he's been one of those players that's always been around the league and he scores a good amount of goals, but he's rarely like, takes off. And so that's why I think he's been to Argentina and he's been to Bolivar. In Bolivia, he's never kind of got that big step to go to Europe or maybe in Mexico or somewhere where you might have expected. But he has that knack of scoring those goals. I think that's the interesting thing, right? When Paraguay had been struggling for so long to find a goal, if we think of the goal against Brazil, that's a magical moment from Diego Gomez that won't be repeated very often. So they're still really looking for someone who can find the back of the net. And so maybe Oviedo is that person who's not going to be the most technically gifted of those players. He's definitely not the most high profile, but he does seem to have this scoring ability. And like you mentioned, it's at altitude as well, which is going to be so key going to Quito now, but then thinking ahead to La Paz in which is what, November, right? So it's just a month after.
Yeah, and I think still the big fear, of course, is that on the one hand, you do see kind of Alfaro trusting his base, like you said, you don't change a winning team, but again, there is that issue. And I repeated it last time when we were talking about what needs to work and needs to improve on this team heading into this break is to score. And I think, getting players that are able to do it no matter what and in what circumstance, I think will be the big factor here, Ralph. And yeah, getting Alfio Oviedo, I think it is a risk, but ultimately, I think Alfaro, in his kind of meticulous way, is kind of understanding of like, yeah, I see what you're doing at Bolivar, and it might be the Bolivian league. Obviously, we don't really call up players from the Bolivian league as a whole. When you have someone like think about this, Ralph. You have players from Brazil, like in your attacking line, you have a Brazilian league based player, you have an Italian league based player, you have an English league based player, and you have an Ecuadorian league based player, and then you have Bolivia there. It's like really you're clearly doing something well to get called up on there. And yeah, maybe he does surprise. I mean, we did see that with last month with Viera getting called up. No one expected it because he was on bad form. And ultimately he did come in, he did the work that he did. He wasn't obviously impressive like the others, but he still did the job. And maybe that could be something that Alfaro can bring to Oviedo that, okay, maybe he hasn't had the best of careers that he wants, even though he's kind of, globetrotted around different clubs, but he could bring that motivation, and maybe that could be a big factor that he could become the hero in Ecuador, where he gives Paraguay their first ever win in altitude. So who knows? That could be a factor, Rob. Or am I just going crazy and just thinking way ahead of myself?
It reminds me a lot, though, of Dario Lescano, who for a long time was kind of forgotten about in Paraguayan football because he was playing out in Switzerland. And eventually got his chance, and he goes and scores 2 goals in Quito in a game that really Paraguay should have won, right? I think they ended up tying 2-2, but they were the better team, I remember, in that game, and they really had a good chance of winning. The other player I remember who scored up in Quito back in the qualifiers for 2014, 2014 would have been Luis Neri Caballero, who's another kind of player that never really got a chance. He wasn't a big goal scorer. He was at Olympia at the time. And so maybe there's something about this fixture where you find that striker who's maybe just a little bit different and not your high profile, your Julio Enciso, or even your Angel Romero, who's been one of the top scorers in World Cup qualifiers for Paraguay. Let's not forget like how important he's been in previous editions. So this could be a time where you just see that wild card, and as we've seen before, Alfaro is a gambler. He likes to make these big decisions, and so far for him, it's been paying off.
Yeah, and I think it would be very interesting. We'll talk about that later when we do our World Cup previews. That going into such a big fixture and one to create history because, like you said, we had the game against Brazil where we haven't beaten them in 16 years. Again, now this kind of thing of Ecuador where there's a lot of factors in it. The fact that he used to coach Ecuador, that he knows Becasecchi, that he knows a lot of these Ecuadorian players, that he wants to break a record that Paraguay has never won in Ecuador ever. It's one of the few countries that they never won a game in a qualifier. So there is a lot going into that. And I think he is gambling on these players and saying, these are the ones that I trust to get the result needed. And ultimately for him, he always said that the clean sheet gets you to the World Cup. And so when you look at some of the defenders that he's trying to get, your Sandez's, your Salcedos, among other players, you're looking at the options saying, you're good for this game. And there's also a reason why there's no Adamadeo as well. It's a shame that he didn't get any playing time in the last two games, and he's kind of been semi decent at River Plate, but maybe it's kind of the case of Alfaro not making the risk, or sorry, not taking the chance of saying I can trust you if need be, or I could just cut you when need be. I think that's a gambling decision, I would say, Ralph, like you said.
I think though also Adam Barreiro and Isidro Pita may be more of the similar styles in terms of that physicality. And he saw what Pita could give him in terms of that hold up play and being physical. So maybe it gives a space. He's more trusting there, and he's like, I'm looking for someone with a slightly different profile, which is definitely Oviedo, and in the case of Angel Romero. I think Romero is really interesting because he's started to find form again. And he's a player that can play he can play on the right side, he can play in the middle, he can do a lot of defensive work as well. So you can see him being a very important piece because of his versatility as well. And I think that's what we're going to see so much in this game against Ecuador. Like we were just talking about, there's a lot of maybe tactical tricks that are going to have to go on to, as these two coaches that know each other very well, try and find out the weak link in the other one. And I think that's where you might see these players that can be more versatile, so you can have in-game changes without having to make substitutions.
Exactly. Obviously, looking into some of these players that also had some good weeks, Ralph May obviously talk about Inter Miami, like Fed had mentioned, they won the Supporters Shield, the first time that Miami has won, I think since 2001. That was the last title that they won where they were the best team in MLS in terms of records. That doesn't mean that they win it though, because obviously, there are going to be some Paraguayans playing in the MLS Cup playoffs. Inter Miami, just mentioning them real quick. Diego Gomez, Matias Rojas, them coming in, they've been really important for this Paraguayan team. Okay, we got to mention David Martinez, he's part of that too, but Gomez is in Rojas, and it's a shame that Rojas is not in the squad for the upcoming qualifiers. But you still can't deny the impact that they've kind of had, especially when Messi wasn't there during the time that he was playing in Copa America or he was injured. Those two really were able to step it up, and yeah, I think it's been impressive for them heading into this season, and I feel that they should feel very motivated that they can win MLS Cup.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think what we saw with Tata Martino managing the team without Messi, because Messi had been injured a lot, just proved that it isn't just him, right? That I think he's managed to change so many things that were wrong in that team, and mostly what you saw is he's built this much stronger squad than they used to have. Because I think what we used to see with Inter Miami is when certain key players were out, they just didn't really have the cover. And now he's got that. And someone like Matias Rojas is really interesting because I think it was a bit of a gamble, right? Because he was having some issues there in Corinthians. You were like, is he going to be the same player that's on this form at the moment, or is he going to be the player we saw in Racing? And he's definitely been more the Racing player and been much more instrumental than I think anybody expected, because there's even been a few games I noticed where he's playing with Messi in the team, and I don't think that was the original plan, but he's kind of worked his way into that position. And then Diego Gomez is just, I mean, his numbers are incredible. We've talked about him before, that he's such a unique player in the kind of skill set he has, and it works so well for a Tata Martino team, which is basically, you know, a Bielsa-like team where there's so much physicality, there's so much pressing, there's so much just athleticism needed to be there, especially when you have Messi and Luis Suarez. So you have two players that aren't running as much as they used to be able to. Well, Messi never ran that much, but like Suarez as well. I mean, he's just retired from the Uruguay national team. So really what you have is Diego Gomez having to fill in like a lot of roles and always producing. I mean, his goals and assists are always there. And just one note, so that's now Diego Gomez has now picked up 6 titles. He only made his professional debut in 2022, so he's basically picked up 2 per year, some with Libertad, 2 with Paraguay. I mean, okay, the Paraguay, they're like youth tournaments essentially, because it's the Olympic qualifiers and then it was the South American Games. But still, I mean, he just keeps finding this level. He just keeps being part of winning teams, an important part of winning teams, and it's just, you just wonder like where is the ceiling for him and where he could go next.
Well, it's Brighton. That's the next option, and you know maybe they will feel lucky getting that bit of luck, and they can push for something a title. They're doing well in the Premier League, so hey, maybe they can get Diego Gomez and make that one step further, but that remains to be seen. But one other player that's been kind of linked to a Premier League team, and this one came right out of the blue this week, Ralph, and you know you were grateful enough to kind of mention it to some people. Diego León, we talked about him already, about this promising left back that Cerro Porteño has had. He's only played 11 games, scored 2 goals, so he's been on good form, but making his professional debut so soon, and he's already been linked to major European clubs, Manchester United, Man City, the City Football Group, and then Arsenal. But then we saw a report yesterday saying that Arsenal apparently are the big main favorites to get Diego León, but I'm just I don't know how this is gonna work out. It's good for him to have these links, but it just seems a bit too far fetched. And you know, you brought up a good example of like kind of the links to it. If you wanted to explain to the people who is Diego León, and I guess you know if something that could be done, making a move to the Premier League.
Yeah, I mean, well, firstly, who is Diego León? He kind of burst onto the scene because if I remember correctly, he wasn't even playing reserves at Cerro. He was actually U17, and then he had like a couple of reserve games, and he's straight into the senior side. And at the beginning of the year, or more this maybe around this time last year, we started to see who was going to get promoted and get the pro contracts, and that's when we heard about people like Gabriel Aguayo, who's been very good. And so we kind of knew about Aguayo before he made his debut. I mean, Leon just really surprised everybody. Kind of came from nowhere. He's only 17, but he's really big. He's very physical. He immediately started scoring goals, which for a left back was surprising people as well. So you could see he was this very attacking player, and so it very exciting all of a sudden. Just an important point as we're talking about Diego Gomez to Brighton, his agent is the same. He has the same agent as Diego Gomez. So obviously the link to Brighton is already established. He also the same agent as Fabian Balbuena, who's been to West Ham. So just to get an idea of there is some possibilities or some movement there around the Premier League. But it's an interesting situation because he's only 17. So obviously he couldn't move until he's 18, which is next year. because of the way, from my understanding, his contract is at Cerro at the moment, he could leave on a free when he's 18. Whatever club signs him will have to pay Cerro formation rights as part of FIFA. But I mean, all of a sudden, I think Cerro are panicking a bit that they gave him his debut and he hasn't signed the pro contract. And so now he could leave. And he's obviously, if he's being looked at by these clubs, he's already valued in the high millions, I would say, like $5 million dollars. So that's a lot of money that Cerro could potentially lose out on. So what we've seen recently is interesting. He didn't start one of the games. I think it was he started against Libertad. It was the next game he didn't play, and then he came off the bench, and they were playing Victor Cabañas, a left back, which was very strange because he's right-footed. So something was going on there. I think that Cerro was saying, "Hey, to sign a contract," and we now all this news broke, and we can see why, because there was real interest. Okay, where's the interest from Arsenal? What's the link with Arsenal? It's interesting. Their South American scout was signed from Real Madrid. He's a Brazilian guy. Diego Gavilan, who was the coach at Paraguay Reserves, and he's been Cerro Reserves, and he's been the head coach. He was also Paraguay under-15s until recently. He obviously played for Grêmio Internacional. He has great links with Brazil. He's obviously working a lot with Brazilian scouts. And you can see that from the players from Cerro that have gone to Brazil recently, like Villasanti, Bobadilla, Fabricio Peralta. So there's that kind of recommendations. I think Cerro players are well known in Brazil. The Arsenal scout is Brazilian, but he also used to work in Cruzeiro and for the Brazil Olympic team, the same as a guy called Rafa Vieira. Rafa Vieira was the video analyst for Cerro for a time. He then left. I think, if I'm right in thinking, he was quite close to Diego Gavilan as well while they were all working together. So you can also get this feeling that, well, these two guys probably know each other for sure. Diego Gavilan and Rafael Vieira knew a lot about Diego León when nobody else did, right? Before he had made his debut. So maybe it's something that actually Arsenal have been keeping tabs on for a lot longer than we realized, because of that very I suppose local connection you have, right, with these few people that seem to have crossed over in their careers over the last 10 years. But then there's one more thing just to mention, that from what I understand, Arsenal have not made any formal offer, right? But the agent of Diego León is confirming that there's some interest there. So it's all very exciting. I think the big question is, though, how do you go from a handful of Primera games with Cerro Porteño to the Premier League? It's a huge risk. And I don't know, if I looked at it from a Premier League club standpoint, I don't think I'd need to take that risk. I would just wait, see how they develop maybe in Argentina or Brazil, and then pay. I'm going to end up paying what, like a few million more dollars, but I have maybe more of that established game time and can see that they might be able to compete to that level. So that's my feeling. I still think it's very unlikely he ends up going to Arsenal, but there's something there for sure, and I think it's quite exciting to see once again Cerro are producing these players that really have the chance to go and do something, because recently there's been a lot of criticism. By the way, we're speaking in the week that Manolo is kicked out of the club, Fernando Juguero is kicked out as sporting director. But really, especially in the case of Juguero, they actually did some really good work from a sporting director role in terms of player sales. What they weren't able to do was do anything with the first team, because they weren't able to kind of regenerate the players they were selling, and so they've never really competed for the title. And as we'll talk about Clausura. But yeah, it's exciting that I think Paraguay continue to produce some of these really top quality players, and obviously Cerro doing this is because Libertad have raised the level so high. And we just talked about Diego Gomez, Julian Ciso, Enzo Gonzalez. This was in the Premier League. So there's been that kind of competition, I think, that's lifting up the quality of Paraguayan youth football.
It's always these clubs trying to find the next bright gem, as always. And for someone like Leon, that is a left back and scoring goals, I think it makes sense of why clubs want a piece of that, because, they want players that, in the European game that, they can do all that. But yeah, I think it does seem very unlikely on my end as well. It just, there's still a lot of factors. And again, for as much as he's already had such a really good start, etc., he's still raw. He's 17. Like, this is someone that's not even been called up to the Paraguay national team yet. I don't think he's ever played Utes national team as well, Ralph, if I'm not mistaken, if you want to confirm that.
Yeah, that I can't remember unless he did U15s, but I can't remember it being in U17s. And like you said, he's raw. I mean, remember he got found out in the Clásico defensively, so he was at fault there. So definitely, there's a lot to still work on, I think, as well.
Yeah, I don't think he's ready for a full 90 minutes at the Emirates just yet. But no, I think it's promising, and I think, certainly we'll have to wait and see if indeed this does happen. And if it does, I mean, yeah, it's a big coup. It would be the first Paraguayan, well, officially Paraguayan born, because the one then we'll actually have to mention it real quick before is the first technically Paraguayan naturalized Paraguayan, Fabian Caballero. He was Argentine born. He unfortunately had passed away this weekend very young, playing in futsal tournament. I think it was a heart attack or something. But yeah, I mean, this would be a big thing, and sadly, it's a shame that we're talking about this now with Fabian Caballero of his kind of his death. But he was a big important factor, I think, in Paraguay as well, coming and playing at Cerro Porteño and other clubs, and of course playing for your beloved Arsenal and Dundee as well in Scotland.
Yeah, that's right. So Fabian Caballero went direct from Cerro to Arsenal to pretty much the best Arsenal team. Or maybe not the best Arsenal team, but it was the 98-99 season. So they just won the title under Wenger. You have Vieira, Petit, and Nelkes there. Yeah, the great team. And Fabian Caballero got that got that chance to be part of that squad and those training. And I met him a few times. A really lovely guy, very generous with his time. He was player coach at Emiliano, Sportivo Emiliano, but this is when they were not the Sportivo Emiliano of today. It was their more traditional third division, I think, at the time. And he would come along to some of our Arsenal Paraguay meetups. But for people that don't know, I'm the general secretary of the Arsenal Paraguay Supporters Club. And so he would come, and it was funny because a lot of us are in, we shouldn't say this, but knockoff shirts that are not real, that bought on Mercado Cuatro or somewhere. He would turn up in his Arsenal shirt, like player edition, that it's the same one that like Bergkamp wore. It was pretty cool. And it was very sad to hear of his passing. And from the Paraguay Supporters Club, I mean, we sent all our condolences, and we sent a wreath to the funeral and everything. So we've been obviously very active because he was a signed up member of our supporters club. And yeah, it was very sad to hear, and a lot of kind words coming actually from England and mostly Scotland. Like you said, a legend in Dundee because he didn't make a huge amount of appearances for Arsenal. He ended up, I think he came back to Tembetaru and then he went off to Dundee. But that happened to coincide with a really good Dundee team, and they had a lot of fun and a lot of success over a few years there.
Yeah, obviously we send our condolences at Guarani Vision to Fabian Caballero and his family and those that were close to him as well. As we switch gears now to the Clausuras, like you had mentioned as well, Ralph, we did see some change in Cerro Porteño. We're going to mention that real quick because we did see Manolo Jimenez finally get the chop. He finally leaves Cerro Porteño after being on a really bad stretch of form. And who comes in? Carlos Jara Saguier. I mean, for someone that has kind of enchanted a lot of Paraguayans this year with them qualifying to the Olympics, to winning the Preolímpico. Had some kind of beef in there with some players, but that could be tossed aside. It doesn't matter. But he's still a nationally renowned guy who's kind of really been in the respect of a lot of Paraguayans. He does something that he hasn't done before, and he kind of achieves his dream per se, coaching his beloved Cerro Porteño for the first time.
Yeah, it's an incredible story, I think, for anybody thinking about, like, maybe if you ever think about where you are in your life or professionally in your career, have you achieved everything you wanted to do? You look at Jara Saguier, and his biggest moment was 2004, winning the silver medal at the Olympics. And then honestly, like, you just didn't really think of him much. He would pick up the odd job here and there, but not particularly big teams. And it was kind of like his time's gone. And then he got this chance to pick up with the Olympic team again this year. and they did so well. I don't think it's so much about where they got to, although obviously it's important the results followed, but it's just the way they played football as well and the style. And it is very old school because as you would expect someone of his age, it's like, not overly tactical, let players express themselves, do what they want to do, which I think, Diego Gomez is one example of how he played totally different there to how he's playing it into Miami, but it still worked really well. And so now his kind of stock has risen and is maybe well, it probably is at his highest point even ever, because I think is in a way is even higher than 2004 because people saw that as almost like his end moment. He wasn't really going to do anything else. And so 20 years later, here he is, and he finally gets to manage Cerro Porteño, which is a team. Yeah, you were saying the team he always wanted to coach and never got the chance. The Jara Saguier family is incredible, by the way. They were all brothers that played professionally. I think 3 of them played for Paraguay, including Carlos Jara Saguier. I think 3 of the brothers played, but they're like 5, 6 brothers or something that all play professionally. It's incredible. And now he comes in at, it's not like a terrible moment in a way, because as much as Cerro are playing very well, I'm just looking at the table, they're only 5 points off Olimpia. There's still a possibility of doing something. They play Sportivo Luqueño. That's going to be the first game for them this weekend. There's still a chance of something. And really, I think what they did need was that change, right? They have the players. They have Cecilio Dominguez is back. They have the group of players that are good enough, I would say, to do something. But where will they be able to do it in time? And will Olympia slip up, which is another question. But I think they've for once sort of made the right choice in making that change now, because it's like, do you just get that boost for there's 9 games left of the season, and will that be enough? And of course, he's going to be managing in a Clásico as well, which is going to be such a big Clásico now, knowing that it's going to close the gap on Olympia if they are able to get the result.
I see some parallels with kind of Alfaro coming to the Paraguay team, someone that is trying to be a motivator, obviously has, renowned respect. Alfaro is respected for his kind of demeanor, the way that he plays, and also just being a motivator. And I think Jara Saguier is like that as well. Certainly the big test will be against Luqueño. We're already seeing some possible lineups. Diego León possibly going to get the start. So that's already, kind of closing the door on this one of getting someone that could be fully trusted and trusting in youth. But yeah, I mean, the big one will be the Super Clásico happening in a couple of weeks. I mean, that's an emotional game, I think, for him, for someone like Jara Saguier, who's back. I think it was since the 80s that he hasn't been involved in Cerro Porteño as a whole. So yeah, it's a big risk. Certainly the worst case scenario would be that it just goes very badly and that he gets burnt out and he leaves. But it could go well for him. You never know. I mean, this could be a situation that if they start a stretch of games that they go on and win, that can really rejuvenate an entire league campaign. And you have teams like Olimpia, Nacional. They could slip up as well, though. Mayo too. I mean, I think certainly if they're able to do that, there is that big chance. So we're not counting out Cerro just yet, even if they did have that big loss against Dole de Mayo on the week. But yeah, one big change and one big win against Luqueño, and possibly heading into that stretch of games before the Super Clásico, can really change a lot of things.
Yeah, and I think you picked up well that he's the right kind of manager for this, that it's more going to be motivation, just letting players do their thing, because you don't have time at this point to totally dismantle a tactical structure or try and put in your own system. And so someone who's a bit more pragmatic, I think, works very well when this is what you're trying to do. And when you looked at Manolo, the writing was kind of on the wall, but I think Cerro had their hands tied because of the Jubero situation. So they had Fernando Jubero as the sporting director, and Manolo was his pick as coach. And I think it was kind of where if you get rid of the coach, you're going to have to get rid of the sporting director. And as I just mentioned earlier, he hasn't done that badly in terms of some of the more business side of things and player sales and managing the youth teams. But but I think Cerro realized, I mean, you can't lose at home 3-0 to Dos de Mayo. Dos de Mayo, we talked about it before, they've been really good at home, but they hadn't been as good away. So when they play away at Cerro, they shouldn't be winning the game and less 3-0. So I think that was, that really had to be the final moment. It's interesting. We're talking about Olympia, I guess, as well, because they're the league leaders, and we're almost building up now to this Super Clásico. Olympia played Trinidense at the weekend, and them Trinidense, of course, are coached by the son of a Cerro legend, the son of Saturnino Arrua. Is their coach, and he's always picked up good results against Olympia. I was just looking, I mean, Olympia won this year, but that was the first time I think they'd beaten Trinidense since 2017. So there you go. I mean, Olympia and Trinidense, that's usually a draw, and they're a bit of a bogey team for Olympia. So you could already see them starting to lose points. And if they did and Cerro win, they close the gap to only 2. I mean, yeah, it's just wide open. And we've got a really good title race. I think that's just to mention as well. Dos de Mayo, by winning, kept themselves in there. Nacional only 1 point behind Olympia, managed again by an ex-Cerro manager in Bernay. So there's so many storylines here. Libertad, maybe they can't do it. I mean, they're not quite able to get these results, and they're relying a lot on Roque Santa Cruz. I think he's now picked up 3 goals in his last 3 games. So he's on a nice run of form for a 43-year-old, right? But they're now 7 points behind, so maybe that's just a bit too much for Libertad. But you still have this 4-team title race, which we really haven't seen recently. It's been Libertad and Cerro trying to catch up with them, or someone else has gone and just like blown it away. We haven't really had like multiple teams fighting for a title like we're seeing this right now.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really interesting end to the season. We still have a lot of games left, so a lot of things can change from here on out. But I'm looking forward to it, as well as I'm looking forward to the qualifiers, what we'll talk about next week. Myself, Ralph Hanna, and Fede Perez, of course, as we always do. And yeah, I think it's going to be very, very interesting this big month in October with so much going on in Paraguayan football as a whole, be it from players, coaches, just football related news. And we'll have it all here on Guarani Vision, as we always do, as we close out another great episode for myself, Roberto Rojas, Ralph Hanna, and of course, Fede Perez. Thank you so much for listening in. See you soon.